Okay, we left off talking last time in the book of 1 Samuel, the time when it seems like, anyway, that Saul had repented of his sins. You know, the way that he felt about it when it's proven to him by David that David could have killed him. David found him when he was asleep there in the cave, and he went up, and his men wanted to kill him, but David refused. But David cut off the skirt part of Saul's robe. And then when Saul had left, David called out to him, and he says, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Behold, David seeks your hurt'?" This is beginning at verse 9 of chapter 24. And he says to him, "Lo, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave, and some bade me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the skirt of your robe in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the skirt of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it." Now, Saul realizes what's happened, that he could have been killed. And the thing about it is that Saul cannot understand how is it that someone has their enemies in their hands and could have killed them and chose to let them go. And yet that's exactly what David has done for him. And so the Bible tells us that Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt well with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day." Now he goes on and he tells David, he knows that for sure now that God is going to have David to serve as king, not Saul, not any of his descendants. But he is amazed at what David has done. You know, I think some of us sometimes would feel that same way. You know, you've got a chance to destroy your enemy. Why not destroy them? But David will not do it. And we'll see that over and over again. Later he'll talk about that, and he'll make the statement, you know, that Saul may be killed by his enemies in battle. He may die of some sickness or even of old age. Or it may be that God himself will take Saul's life. But David said, "He will not die by my hand." David had great respect for Saul as the leader. He was the king, and he wasn't doing what he should have been doing as a king, but David still respected him and understood he is the anointed of God. You know, God saw to it that the kings were always being anointed, but the priests also were anointed for service. But when you think about the anointed one, who do you think about? About Christ. He is the anointed one. The very word Christ or Messiah means anointed one, anointed by God. You think about those people who had the nerve to put forth their hands to strike down God's anointed one, the Christ. David understands one who is anointed by God, chosen by God, is one that has to be respected and is not to be punished. And so he will not do it. Even though, you know, Saul seems to have repented, we know later that he did not, because that's going to come up again and again. Now, what I want to look at next here in this next chapter is a story about David, Abigail, and Nabal. David is the future king. He's already been anointed, but he hasn't taken the power yet, hasn't begun to serve. There's Abigail, David's future wife, but at the present time she's the wife of Nabal. And there's Nabal, who is soon going to be dead. But it's an intriguing story here about these three and what's going on in the lives of these three. And especially with this woman, Abigail. And we're going to have a lot to say about her as we go through this. And I'll admit up front, I got most of this information from my son. He did a lesson one time on Abigail, and he sent me an email of it. I think sent one to his mother, Donna, also, because she was studying about Abigail at that time. And so I can't take credit for any of that. It's good. But But as we began looking about them, thinking about, first of all, I want to look at this man Nabal. What does the name Nabal mean? Do you have a footnote maybe in your Bible that tells you? What? A fool? Yeah. This is a definition I got out of one of the books that I was reading about it. And it says that Nabal means obstinate fool. Now, it's unlikely that a daddy or a mother would name their newborn child obstinate fool. This evidently is something that he gained later in life because of the way he lived, because of what he did, that other people began calling him that. And his wife is going to make mention of it, that's the type. He's called Nabal because that's the way he lives. He lives as a fool, an obstinate fool at that. But something else about this man, and that is he's extremely rich. Now, a lot of times, most people think, well, that's what really matters, isn't it? There's some people, that's their goal in life, is to get rich, and they don't care what they have to do to get it. They're not really concerned about their spiritual life and how they're living. And this man became very rich. How many sheep did he have? 3,000. Now, that's not as many as Job had, and Job was the wealthiest man in the world of his day, but 3,000, that's still a huge amount of sheep for any one person to have. And how many goats? 1,000. So he's a wealthy person. He's got a good bit going on there that he has for himself and his family. But we're going to see something about that too in a minute. Who is he descended from? Who? Caleb. Now, what do you know about Caleb? When the 12 spies go in the land to spy out the land, 10 people come back with a bad report. We can't take it. They're giants, and we're like grasshoppers. 2 people had a good report. Who were they? Joshua and Caleb. Caleb is the one that I really love about that man. He was 45 years old when they left Egypt. They spent 40 years in the wilderness. When they get to the promised land, he's 85 years old. And they're talking about going in that land to conquer it. And he's the only one that has that good attitude about it. He tells the people, let us go up at once, for we're well able to overtake it. And when they get ready to go into battle, and they're going to divide up the land, do you remember which land Caleb asked for? Now, they divided it up by lots, but Caleb made a special request for a particular part of that land he wanted. He wanted the mountains. Why? This is the thing that's key to it. That's where the giants lived. Everybody else is terrified of the giants, and they don't. And he says, give me the land where those giants are found. And he says, if perhaps the Lord's with me, I'll drive them out. But, he was trusting in God to do that. He's a tremendous man, has such great qualities about him. Now, here's one of his descendants, Nabal. Nabal has great riches, but he has nothing of the spiritual character of his famous ancestor. And I think that, if we stop to think about how important it is in life for us, instead of being concerned about riches and hoarding up all we can for ourselves, we ought to be trying to imitate the spiritual qualities of these great men and women of God and become more and more like them. And we're going to see that in a minute with this woman, Abigail, also. So here's Nabal, obstinate fool. He's rich, but he's not a spiritually minded person. He doesn't really care about anybody else except himself. And so here he is. He's got all of this wealth. He's got a beautiful wife, Abigail. And the Bible, when it talks about her, says she's a beautiful woman, but also a woman of good understanding. You know what her name means? I didn't know any of this stuff. I have to look it up too. Abigail means a joy to her father. Can you imagine she's married to somebody whose name means obstinate fool, and she's got a name that means a joy to her father. I think every father in life's desire is that they'll have children that will be a joy to their father. And she proves it here by her actions, by how she behaves. The quality she has in life is the thing that any father should be, ought to be, proud of, to have in a child of theirs. And like I said, we want to talk about that in depth here in a minute. But now, first of all, if we get to looking at this, Nabal's flocks, 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats. In that day and time, being a shepherd, watching after that many animals, was an extremely dangerous job. Why? What was so dangerous about it? All right, let's look at Job for just a minute. Job chapter 1, verse 14, 15, and 17. And a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they've killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. It was a dangerous business, being a shepherd back then. Especially if somebody's got this many animals, and nations would come together and raid against them to steal everything they've got and to kill whoever was there watching them. Now, Nabal's an extremely rich man. That's got to be tempting to anybody. Somebody's got 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats, tempting. And if you're going to rob somebody, here's the one you want to rob. You can get a lot from him. But they don't do that because, as we looked at before, let me get back to that, Nabal's flocks and shepherds had been protected by David's men. Now, initially, when you read that, you may not see it. I was kind of misunderstanding this a little bit, I think, myself in some regards. David sends his young men to Nabal to get some, let me get up to that, get some reward for the protection they've been providing for him and his men. And so David tells his men to go up there, and here's what is right there to tell Nabal. Peace be to you. This is chapter 25, down at about verse 6. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm. And they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Now, when I first read that, I thought, David is saying to this man, look, our men were there with your shepherds and all those flocks, and we didn't take anything from you. And almost like, you need to pay me now because we didn't take anything. What does that sound like? If that was what he was really saying. You ever heard of something called a protection racket? You go into a person that's got a business, boy, it'd be a shame if your business burned down overnight. You need insurance. Now, you pay me $1,000, and I'll make sure that this place doesn't burn down. So it almost sounds like, hey, you didn't miss anything. We didn't steal anything from you. You ought to be thankful for that and pay us. But that wasn't what he was saying. David was saying, that while we were there, you didn't miss anything. Nothing was stolen from you. And he goes on, he says, ask your young men, those who were the shepherds, about that. This down to verse 8. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Pray, give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. In other words, David said, you didn't miss anything because we were there to protect them. We kept any of these bands from coming in and raiding and taking away your possessions and killing the shepherds you had out there watching them. And so, out of thanksgiving for what we've done, you ought to be willing to share with my men. And so I've sent these 10 men asking something of you that you might provide for us. And here's what the men had said about them. But the men were very good. This is the shepherds now that belonged to Nabal. They're telling Abigail about it. They said, but the men were very good to us, and we were not hurt, nor did we miss anything, as long as we accompanied them when we were in the fields. They were a wall to us, both by night and day, all the time we were with them, keeping the sheep. And so, at night you could bring your fold or sheep into the fold where they're protected. Well, he says that's what David's men were. They were a wall about us to protect us, so that we suffered no loss, no harm came to any of us, no animals were lost, because of the protection being provided by David and his men. So his own men are telling Nabal this, you need to help these men. You need to show gratitude to them for what they've done and the protection they've given, and give them a little something. You've got great riches. You're not going to miss it, and help these men out for what they've done for us. But Nabal acted as if David were a nobody, and that his men were just runaway slaves. That's the attitude he took, and that's what he said to them. And Nabal answered David's servants, this is down at verse 10, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed from my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where? In other words, don't expect me to do anything to help these men. I'm not going to give anything. I've got all this wealth that I've got supplied, but that's for me and for my men, the ones that are working for me. And I don't know anything about this man, David. He says, I know there have been a lot of people who've broken away from their masters, and they've run away. For all I know, that's what David and his men are. Well, David has fled, hasn't he? He's broken away from Saul, but he's fleeing for his own life because Saul's threatening him. And so that's maybe the initiative behind why Nabal says what he does. But it shows his unwillingness. No gratitude, no thanksgiving. But something else, if you notice, I try to emphasize that as you're reading what Nabal was saying to them. And that is he keeps talking about himself. He's talking there over and over again. He mentions that. He says, shall I take my bread, my water, my meat that I have killed for my shearers? It's all me, me, me. All of this belongs to me, and I'm not giving it away to anybody. I don't care what David may have done. I don't care how his men may have protected. I'm not going to respect them in return and give them any of this for their men. That's the passage there. Now, Abigail. Oh, man. If it hadn't been for this woman, what would have happened to Nabal and all of his men that he had? Abigail was a peacemaker. Now, we talked a little bit about that in our Sunday class, looking through the book of Matthew, and Jesus speaking on the Sermon on the Mount. And one of the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers. Now, what do we say? What is a peacemaker? One who makes peace. You don't always have to be successful, but you're trying. Right. To try to bring about a resolution to the conflict there. And that's exactly what this woman Abigail is going to do. She is going to be a go-between between her husband and between David and his men. Because when the men of David come back and they tell David how Nabal has responded, what was David's thought? What did he tell his men to do? That's right. Gird on your swords. Get ready. And he says, may the Lord do to me also if there's a single man of Nabal alive at the end of this day. So his intentions are clear. He's going to go in there and he's going to kill every one of Nabal's men, including Nabal. Now, think about the possibilities of what would happen had he done that. Number one, the indications given here throughout this that David would have been wrong to do that. It would have been against the will of God, against the law of God for him to go in there and kill all of those men. But now, these men, Nabal and those that he has with him of his people, are descendants of Caleb. What tribe was Caleb from? You remember that? Let me ask you, what tribe is David from? Judah. Now, what tribe is Caleb from? That's a pretty good hint. He's from Judah. And so if he goes and kills those men, then David is going to be responsible for killing off those of his own tribe, Judah. Now later on, David is going to need the support of the men of Judah to cement his position as king in Israel. That's going to be extremely important. But if he goes in there with his men and starts killing off these other men who are from Judah, there's a good possibility he may not get that support. And everything would be wrong. So when this woman intercedes here to bring about peace and to keep David from doing it, not only is she saving David from some sin in killing those men, but she's also perhaps preserving the path that he has to cementing his control over Israel as the king by preventing him from waging war against other men in the tribe of Judah. I mean, that could have caused problems for him throughout the rest of his life in doing that. And so Abigail's a peacemaker, and she does a great work here in bringing this about. Look at what it says, 1 Samuel 25:18. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, fine sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisin, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. 2 things. Notice the fact that it says Abigail made haste. She is in a hurry to do what needs to be done to bring about peace between Nabal and his men and David and his men. It's interesting that all this began, we've looked at it, David when he came to the city of Nob looking for food and for weapons, and he explained to the priest he didn't have time to get all that bring with him because he said the king's business requires haste. Tell you, making peace requires haste. You don't need to put off because it's just going to make it worse, and it's not going to be successful if you do that. So she is determined to do what she can to bring it about, and so she makes haste to bring this about, to get the help that's needed. Here's a statement. I don't know, this is what Serge had in his notes. He says it's easier to stomp out a match than to contain a forest fire. And that's why she makes haste. It's going to be easier to prevent, stop it before it begins than to wait till the battle ensues and then try to get in there and stop it. And so that's why she makes haste. Now, why carrying all this food? Is she trying to blackmail David? What's that? Trying to appease him. Now, why is he angry to begin with? Well, he's angry because he sent his men there. We've been protecting your flocks and your men, and I just, want a little bit of gift from you for us because of the work we've done in protecting you, and Nabal has refused to do it. So what she's doing is she is taking that offering, that food that David would have sought to begin with. I mean, this is what's caused the dispute between the two now. That's why David's angry, wants to kill them. And so to appease him, give him that food that he's asked for. And so she got all that together and loaded it on donkeys to get to David. And again, she's acting, hastily to do that. But she also acted selflessly. I hope I put this verse up here. Well, I want to come back to that later. She acted selflessly. I want to look here at the statement she makes when she comes to David. And this is important. Beginning at verse 23 in chapter 25. When Abigail saw David, she made haste and alighted from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, Upon me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Pray let your handmaid speak in your ears and hear the words of your handmaid. Let not my Lord regard this ill-natured fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your handmaid, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, seeing the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from taking vengeance with your own hand, Now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now let this present which your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. This is what you sent them for. Nabal refused to give it. Now I'm bringing it to you. But what's really interesting to me is the statement she makes in the very beginning. When she says to David, she falls at his feet, and she says, upon me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Now I want to know, what did Abigail do that was wrong? Nothing. She did no wrong. Then why is she saying to David, the guilt be on me? She's trying to protect her husband. And man, he's the one that's been acting like that. And she goes on and admits that that's the way he behaved. And she says, I wasn't there when your young men came. But now, in other words, don't be angry at my husband, as you are, and wanting to kill him and all the men. Let it be on me. Let me be the one toward whom your anger is going to be turned. Upon me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Pray, let your handmaid speak in your ears and hear the words of your handmaid. So this is why I talk about her in this respect when she does that she's acting selflessly. She's not concerned about herself. And yet, how many times in life do we act out in something like that? We act for ourselves. I know I have a tendency. If I'm not the one that made the mistake, I don't want to be the one to say, hey, let all the guilt be on me. But she's willing to do that to protect her husband as well as protecting the other men that are there. She's willing to take responsibility for it when she's not responsible. Now, I said I had this other verse up here because in the New Testament, when Paul writes to the church there at Corinth in the first letter, he says, but brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers. Now, therefore, it is already an utter failure for you that you go to law against one another. Why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourselves be cheated? When there's disputes here between brethren. Now, Nabal is a descendant of Caleb. He's from the tribe of Judah, and so is David. They're brethren. Abigail, it's her husband that's caused this trouble. But she said, let all it be on me. Why? Well, here it is, in the church, if we go to law with one another, Paul says, you've already failed. You've already lost. Instead of doing that, instead of thinking about me and my rights, think more about the church as a whole. You have your rights. You have a right to defend yourself. But if in holding on to your right and defending yourself, it hurts the cause of Christ, why not be willing to suffer the loss yourself in order that the church not be harmed? Abigail's willing to suffer the loss herself rather than to see her husband harmed. And then when you look at it, everything that the Bible tells us about Nabal, you got to think, why in the world would you want to defend a rascal like that? But that's the attitude that she has. And that's what's so remarkable about this woman in doing this. But she also acted graciously. When you look back again at everything that the Bible mentions that she gathered together to give to David's men, 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and brought all of that then to David to be given to the young men that had come in the first place. Yes, sir. Right. I was going to say, when it says that the sheep are ready dressed, that means they've already been prepared to food. Now, she's acting hastily. She didn't have time to go in and have them take 5 sheep and butcher them and get them ready to cook and everything. So, yeah, you're right. It's probably something that's already reserved. And something else about it. Who is it that she didn't tell about this? Didn't tell her husband. I mean, she's explaining to David. She knows what he's like. And in all likelihood, if she had told him, what would his reaction been? That's right. Not on your life. I've already told those men. I'm not giving them anything, and I'm not going to allow you to give anything. So that's why she does it without his knowledge. She goes on to do this, to act quickly. But in doing this, she proves herself to be someone that's very gracious. She's given a great gift to them. It's a large amount of food that's being provided for them, and that's important here. We'll look back at verse 8. We talked about that being this was the basis of the argument to begin with. But anyhow, when the young men had come from David to speak to him, they said to them, "Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day." So there's where that food has already been prepared. It's a feast day. It's all that food's been prepared for them. And that's where the problem began. Nabal is not willing to give that food to them. So that's why now she's taking that food that could have been given and taking it to them to help bring about the peace. So she's a peacemaker in it, but not only a peacemaker, she's someone who's acting selflessly and graciously and providing for the people there on that occasion. I found this statement here. It says, Abigail is a hero because maintaining peace and unity was more important to her than her personal pride or property. She truly had her priorities right. Not only that, look at how David responded to that. When she comes to him and she gives all that to him and falls down before him to speak to him about that, look at David's response. Verse 32 of chapter 25. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from avenging myself with my own hand." Thank you, Abigail, first of all, because you've kept me from sin. You kept me from becoming blood guilty. That is, guilty of shedding blood that I had no right to do. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had made haste and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hands what she had brought him, and he said to her, "Go up in peace to your house. See, I have hearkened to your voice, and I have granted your petition." She's a peacemaker, and it worked. David sends her away in peace. No harm's coming to her, no harm's coming to Nabal, no harm's coming to Nabal's men because of what this woman has done, because of how she has acted, acting as a peacemaker, selflessly and graciously. Right. Yeah. Now see, this is something else too sometimes. The thing about anger, the Bible teaches be angry and sin not. But the thing about anger is that it's so easy when you become angry that you act before you think. Most murders that are committed in our country are acts of passion. It's not a premeditated thing, but it's where somebody gets angry quickly and acts quickly and lashes out at someone to kill them. And if it hadn't been for this woman, and notice too, he says that if she had not acted in haste, if she had delayed any at all, I like the statements made in the Bible that she went down to meet David, and David went down coming to them. So evidently they met there in the valley. And David's telling her, if you hadn't acted hastily, if you'd have waited just a little bit till I got up there, it would have been too late. And so you've done well in doing what you did and doing it hastily. And you're right. You've saved David from committing sin because you kept David from doing something without thinking. And the fact that when she came to him too, her first words to him, she says, "Let your handmaid speak in your ears and hear the words of your handmaid." Let's take just enough time, David, to think about this situation and what you're fixing to do. And doing that causes David to realize that she has kept him from sin. Uh, and she has saved also the life of her husband and those other men. Otherwise, David would have killed them. And then we read about the death of Nabal. Now, this man here dies, but it's not at the hand of David. The Bible says, and Abigail came to Nabal, and lo, he was holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, and he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. And in the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord smote Nabal, and he died. His heart died within him. Now, what caused that? And I think, what do you think that means, his heart died within him? I don't think that means he's had a heart attack. I don't think that means his heart stopped beating or anything. Well, I hadn't thought about that. I don't know if you could hear Willie. He was saying that maybe Abigail told Nabal the story about what David was going to do to him. And maybe that's what caused his heart to die within him. I was thinking, though, because of the type of person Nabal is, when she tells Nabal, all that food that was prepared for the men, I gave that to David and his men. And his heart died within him then that, it just discouraged him totally. And because that was the last thing he wanted to see happen. He was determined he wasn't going to give anything, and now he knows behind my back my wife's taking it to him. And so he's discouraged because he's been defeated in that. He can't bring himself to be punishing David and his men by not letting them have that food. So anyhow, his heart dies within him, but then after that, it says, and he became as a stone. In what way did he become as a stone? All right, that's what I'm thinking. Paralyzed, where he can't move. Now, what would cause something like that? Possible stroke that's happened here. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that would come into the emotions on that would really, hurt him, aggravate him. Right, yeah. That's got to add on to that. I mean, just everything, it seems like, that could go contrary to what Nabal would have wanted has happened. And really, things like that can bring on, if you've got any kind of problems at all in the man that drinks like he did, all of this on him could cause a person to have a stroke. Okay, had not thought about that too. Again, I don't know if you could hear her. She said, emotionally, he may have become like a stone, because of all that's happened. His enemy's getting my food, but not only that, his enemy's getting the help and support of my wife against me, and emotionally, he just doesn't do anything. He just feels like he can't do anything. He doesn't move. And so all of that's happened to him. And then, after all of this happens, 10 days later, it says that the Lord smote Nabal, and he died. Maybe a second stroke that hits him is what kills him. And so, when David heard, verse 39, when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from evil. The Lord has returned the evil doing of Nabal upon his own head. Then David sent and wooed Abigail to make her his wife. And when the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, David has sent us to you to take you to him as his wife. And she rose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. And Abigail made haste and rose and mounted on a donkey, and her 5 maidens attended her. She went after the messengers of David and became his wife. David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. Saul had given Michal his daughter to David to be wife, and given her to Paltai, the son of Laish, who was of Gallim. So David, I wonder how much of that was in his mind ahead of time. When he learns that Nabal's dead, he sends men to Abigail, and he woos her to take her to be his wife. Now, there's something interesting in this. I don't know if there's any connection to it or not, but I want to look back now to when David, or Abigail comes to David, and she's speaking to him. All right, she says, "Pray forgive the trespass of your handmaid, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live." And she goes on talking about David and what's going to happen to him. But look at the statement. Verse 29 is intriguing to me. "If men rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living, in the care of the Lord your God, and the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling." That's got to have memories back to David's battle against Goliath and using that sling to defeat Goliath. And now she said, may all of your enemies, may God use all of your enemies to treat them like that, as in a sling and being slung out, that they would be defeated. Yeah, and the Bible says that he wooed her. Yeah. I mean, he didn't just take her by force and say, "You're going to be my wife." He spoke the word to get it. But look, this is the last statement we have here from Abigail to David when she's delivered all this food to him. She says, "And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your handmaid." And he did. When Nabal's dead, he sends for her. And I don't know if that's what was being talked about here. She's married to this man. She's faithful to him. She's trying to protect him. But she knows the kind of an individual he is. And now when God blesses you, David, and maybe part of that blessing is your enemy being destroyed, because she's talked about all your enemies being destroyed, then remember me. So when one of your enemies, Nabal, is destroyed, remember me. And he comes and he takes her. Now, it may be, too, that when she comes, well, the Bible tells us when she came, she brought 5 of her handmaids with her. But in all likelihood, she also brought all of the wealth of Nabal. Because there's no mention anywhere in the Bible here about his children. Nothing said about those who would inherit from him. I guess she would be, the wife would be the one to inherit it. So all of that wealth is being brought to David. And again, that may be, part of God's plan, because David is fleeing from Saul. He doesn't have any way of providing for himself and everybody. He's been asking, like with Nabal, asking, give something for my men, something to eat. And now all of a sudden, all of this is being supplied to him, everything that Nabal has. Yes, sir. Right. Yeah, that's true. Okay, the other class, their time's gone. Let's close out with a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father, again, we pray your care and blessings upon us throughout this life, and help us, Father, in our own lives to learn from this, that we might be kind of people like Abigail, who will be people of peacemakers, people who will be gracious to others and helpful, Father, to others as we can in life. that we might bring glory and honor to Thee and lead others to Thee. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.